Hello, you're listening to Looking Ahead, sponsored by Watergap Wellness. My name is Aynisa. Thanks so much for joining. Our guest this week is Jason Mayo. He is a recovery advocate, a recovery coach, does some amazing work in the community. He's also a creative, which always love to have people on who are kind of embedded in the creative world as well. And he does some really interesting projects that he's going to talk about today. And if you're listening, you might be interested and want to jump in and be a part of one of them, or just take a look at what he's doing. So we do this show, talk about recovery, mental health, addiction, wellness, services that are available, and just cool stuff that people are doing out in the community. Because being sober and being well and healthy and on the other side of recovery, some people see that as a chore, but we see it as a gift and kind of a purpose that can be paved for you. And, you know, we try to embrace it in as many ways as we can. So that's why we do the show, to really talk about that stuff and make recovery exciting, because it is. So Jason, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
It's awesome to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, I want to be you.
Oh, no.
When I grow up.
That's so funny. I'd rather be you.
No.
So let's switch. Let's do one of those things.
I want to be you. I'm still kind of a newbie in, this industry. So it's like you're in the space you do a lot of outreach, and you're in the community, and you're also dealing with people on the behavioral health side of it. And I love that.
Thanks,
this is exactly what I want to do.
Yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
Maybe even a radio show one day.
Yeah,
this is amazing. All right. So anyway, let's see. I'm in recovery. I'll be celebrating a nice big anniversary in March. I'll have 15 years in recovery.
Nice.
So I'm really excited about that. And I come from the advertising business. I was in advertising. I owned visual effects and animation companies for 30 years. And COVID hit, and I was like working from home. We got rid of our space. We were all working from home. And I started to think like, wow, like I'm watching Netflix with my wife. I'm taking my kid to school and for Starbucks and stuff like that. And I'm not working 16-hour days, and I don't have to commute to the city an hour each way. And I feel not as tired and exhausted. And I was like, I can't go back. Like, I just can't go back. It was, and COVID was like the most horrible thing of our generation, right? Aside from maybe September 11th, which was incredibly horrible to experience. But I was like, that time period was the best wake-up call and the best thing that ever happened to me, because I realized how much time I was losing by commuting back and forth to the city. And I'm not one of those people that compartmentalize things. So my work was my life, and I can count on one hand how many dinners I had with my family. When my kids are a little older, at 22 and 18, but like I was never home, when they were growing up, and I started to detach from work. I had my own company. I started to detach from work, and got to a point where I said to my partners, I'm like, I'm leaving. I have a couple of months left, and we can either like sell the place, or you can buy me out, or we can close it. But I can't come back. Like my life is so different right now, and
wow.
It was a wake up call.
Yeah.
And I had been trying to leave the industry and find something with purpose, and there's so much fear around doing something new. I didn't know what my transferable skills were. I'm a 50-year-old man, and I'm just like, nobody's going to want me. I can't do anything. Like, what's my family going to think of me? I'm going to be embarrassed. There's a line, fear is all about not getting what you want, fear of not getting what you want, or fear of losing what you have. And that's exactly where I was. And did some research about recovery coaching, met some good people through the 12-step program that I'm, a fellow in, and wound up in this great profession. And took me about 6 months to realize that, wow, I have some transferable skills. Like, I'm kind of doing what I did there, but here, meeting people and talking with people, and just trying to lead, and also found creativity in this side of my life now too. So
I want to hear about the creative work, because I think that's amazing what you do and what you put out there. And I actually know a couple of like colleagues in the field that are involved, and they kind of heard that I was working with you, and they were like, oh, I did a blog for him, and I did this. And I think that you're definitely, you don't seem so new in the field as you are, right? Like, you jumped right in with both feet, which is really cool to see. And not only that, but you're making it exciting, which, we need more of that energy. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, so go back like 2008, okay? And I'll make it kind of short because
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
it's
have a
fine.
lot of time.
Yeah.
But go back to 2008. Writing has always been a passion of mine. And the mommy blog craze was happening. I don't know if you guys remember the mommy blog craze, but so there was just like thousands of moms, just stay-at-home moms that were blogging about their experience, and it was huge. Like everybody was going to parenting blogs, mommy blogs, and there were really no dad blogs. There were a couple, and my kids were 7 and 3 or 5 and 2. It was before I got sober. And I was like, wow, let me write about this, and be like a dad blogger. And so I started this blog called Outnumbered. It was like before the TV show was popular in England. So I actually got like a good website name and everything. But so I started this blog, and it was just like a humor blog about my experience as a parent. And the mommy bloggers kind of like took me under their wing, and it became one of the biggest dad blogs out there. So I was like having like 20,000 views a month or something like that, speaking at mommy blogger conventions. And
I love that. I didn't know that.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I met a lot of good people. But what was happening was I was drinking, and there's a line in this book of my 12, can I say AA? I'm an AA guy. Yeah. So there's a line in the big book that says, there's the person that you are and the person you want people to think that you are. And, listen, I was a good dad. Like I wasn't a bad dad, but I was writing, it was truth, but I was writing about all these great things that were happening and funny things. And at the end of the day, I was going home and, looking in the mirror and feeling like a piece of crap, and it just got harder and harder to write about all these good things when I felt like such, like horrible on the inside about myself.
Yeah.
But, so I was doing, but I loved the creative part of it. So I wound up getting sober in 2010, and I continued to blog for a couple more years, but eventually it's like, I don't want to talk about myself anymore. I need to work on myself, and I need to sort of like redirect my attention to stuff other than myself, like working with people or just doing stuff in my family without putting it online.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but then I stopped writing for a really long time, and I had no inspiration to write whatsoever. And fast forward to now, in this business that we're in, and working with people, and doing really what I'm passionate about, which is helping other people in recovery and advocating for people in recovery, right? Because the stigma, that's a whole other thing. I started to get inspired to write again, and I started a blog called "If It Hurts, It Helps." And I started writing about my personal experience. And the thing about that was, the most messed up stuff that you go through in your recovery becomes our greatest assets.
Yeah, it's true.
So that's where that title comes from. And it was great. I was posting like a couple times a week. I was just writing about everything, and I was so inspired. And I wound up meeting this person online. I searched like most popular recovery blogs or whatever, most popular sober blogs, and a blog called The Sober Curator came up. It's this huge website, and it's run by a woman named Elise Bryson. She's a tornado of recovery. She's amazing. And I said, I love the website. This is my blog. Check it out. And she's like, do you want to write for The Sober Curator? And I was like, yeah, I want to write for The Sober Curator. So I started writing for them and posting for them. And, I was like, wow, like I love the blog that I'm writing, but I see what Elise is doing. Like it's a sober lifestyle magazine about entertainment and travel and everything.
That's amazing. What is it called?
TheSoberCurator.com.
That's what the magazine is called?
Yes,
to find
SoberCurator.com.
Okay. Nice.
And I'm like, I want to do more. So that's when I was like, how can I make my blog a little bit more than what it is, just personal stories, and not be about me all over again? Because I was like starting to feel that. So I was like, what are some different things I can try to do? And I thought of this name, Sober Not Subtle, which to me is kind of me, right? But it really has to do with like advocacy and speaking out and not being ashamed of your sobriety and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's where that website started.
So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back, Jason. But how do we find that? Is it sobernotsubtle.com?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Sobernotsubtle.com.
Awesome. All right. So if you want to learn more about Jason and the work he's doing, in the next segment, we will give his contact information, Jason, number, email, whatever you want to provide, just so our listeners can find you and maybe look into more of this wonderful work that you're doing. Show is sponsored by Water Gap Wellness. If you want to learn more about us, you could give me a call direct at 646-599-0577. We'll be right back. Hello, you're listening to Looking Ahead, sponsored by Watergap Wellness. Thank you so much for joining. I have a great guest this week, Jason Mayo. He does some wonderful work in the community. He's a recovery coach, an advocate, a writer, really just has involved in nonprofits, has really made a name for himself, not only in helping people and reaching people that are struggling, but also those who are, doing pretty well, but are looking for different outlets and channels to get involved and stay inspired. Jason does a lot of creative work that can really just plug into, your story. If you're looking for work to get involved in, or, you just feel like you're out there, you're in recovery, you're kind of going through the motions, you're looking for more, I highly recommend getting in touch with him. So Jason, tell us more about your website specifically and the work that you do.
Okay, so Sober Not Subtle, it started out with me just writing, what I would usually do, just humorous and sometimes raw takes on my recovery. And then I was just like, I got to do more. And it just started to evolve slowly, but it turned into something completely different. So the first thing I thought is, I don't want it just to be my voice. It just doesn't make sense to me. I want to do more with that. So I was like, let's do a section for personal stories. And I would just go out and just find people that I know in recovery, or people in the field that I've been meeting, and ask them to tell their personal stories about recovery. And it doesn't have to be people in recovery. It could be behavioral health specialists. It could be advocates in recovery. It could be sober allies. And it took on a life of its own. And it's about recovery, but it's also about mental health, right? Because co-occurrence is a thing, and they live hand in hand. And so I started to get like all these people that are contributing. One of the people, I saw you recently at the Alex's Story play by Crystal Hensel. And I approached her, and she wrote an amazing piece for Sober Not Subtle about, she lost her brother, death by suicide, and did a whole play about addiction. So she wrote an amazing piece on that. I was on a podcast called The Sober Dad Crew. Stephen Kimball is the host, and it's an amazing podcast for sober dads. And he wrote a piece. Merritt, our friend Merritt, drug and alcohol counselor, wrote a piece. I don't know if you know Larry Lamandola. He lost his daughter to fentanyl poisoning, and he wrote a really gut-wrenching piece. Elise Bryson from Sober Curator wrote something. I have psychiatrists. I have people that I'm not into psychedelics, but I know it's a medium for recovery. So I've had a couple of people that guide people through psychedelics. There's just a whole bunch. So everybody's like contributing stories, and these people in recovery that I know through the work that we do. So we're doing that, and I also put a resource page on that. And your place is on there as one of the resources. So people that need resources that might be new in recovery, or even friends or family members that are looking for resources for loved ones. So there's a whole resource page. There's a page on the peer movement, because I'm a peer advocate, and that's a super upcoming profession. It's still relatively new, but it's more and more accepted, and it's a really great pathway for people that are in recovery, that are looking to start over. So there's also there's a merch store. So a little plug for my merch store, Sober Not Subtle merch, and all of the profits for that merch go to a not-for-profit.
Nice.
So, I don't see a dime of it. It all goes for not-for-profit. There's a self-care section with ideas for self-care. And there's also a section for podcast recommendations. So it became this community, really, that people can be a part of. And, for me, hearing people's personal stories, and even telling your personal story, is a way to identify. And, identification was a huge part for me in finally finding my recovery and finding that I'm not alone. So by telling personal stories, you get that identification. And by getting that identification and telling the personal stories, you put yourself out there, and you can fight that stigma.
There's a lot of concepts that I talk about, and spiritual concepts, and there's a Native American one that talks about giving shape to our struggle, because it helps you to have a sense of control over it, to understand it, to give a narrative to it, and then kind of move through it, right? So the energy doesn't just get stuck in our systems. And if you don't give shape, it kind of just lives inside you in this weird nebulous form, and can really affect you negatively, make you sick, make you mentally, physically sick. Wherever it comes out, it manifests in some way, right? And I'm really all about that. So when people say, well, why therapy or why treatment? I'm like, well, at the very least, let's talk about your story a bit, let's give it some shape. You don't have to talk about it over and over again. But for a lot of people, it's this ambiguous thing that they're not really sure how to put language switch to. So that work that you're doing is more than just like, hey, yeah, we write about recovery. Like, it has so much therapeutic value, whether I'm reading about it or writing my own. Like, even somebody who's in recovery and doesn't, they're trying to navigate and they don't have that shape that we're talking about, and they read someone else's story, that could even help them give shape to it and be like, oh, that resonates with me, right? That makes sense to me, because what I'm going through didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Right. So there's huge value in that.
Yeah. You also just mentioned really a different pathway to recovery too. I mean, when I first got sober, I said, I'm an AA guy, and AA was the only thing that had ever worked for me ever. Like, it made me cry. It gave me so much hope, and I still don't know to this day how I stopped drinking. I really don't. It's like a miracle, right? But after 13 years of sobriety and then getting into this business, part of being a recovery coach is being open to all pathways of recovery. You meet the person where they're at. And I learned so much about different pathways to recovery. Like, I'd never heard of smart recovery. I'd never heard of recovery dharma. Just like, and therapy and meditation. Like, yoga can be your pathway to recovery.
Yeah.
So I had like,
right? Anything.
Nature, anything. So there was like, for me, there was like a stigma almost inside of my recovery too, against other pathways to recovery. And, a lot of this stuff I found out from participants from the program saying, hey, have you ever heard of smart recovery? And I was like, no. So then I researched smart recovery. I became a facilitator for smart recovery, so I can do smart recovery meetings. And that has been such an evolution to my own personal recovery. I have my work, which is about recovery, but then I have my own personal recovery. I've learned to separate that because it was not easy at first. But now I have all those tools that I've picked up along the way that have enriched my recovery so much. Yeah. So, just doing this work and, doing Sober Not Subtle has just helped my recovery in ways that I never would have had imagined if you asked me, when I was first coming around, just going to the rooms, which I still do. Like, that's still my main thing. But
and I think these things, like what you just described, expanding perspective and, just looking at what's out there with that open mind, it could happen at minute 1 in recovery. It could happen at minute 1,000. It could happen 10 years out. Yeah. You could be in a good place in your recovery and still be like, oh, let me try that. That might help me. Or let me read this. That might, enlighten me a little bit. Yeah. It's just like with anything, with mental health, with recovery, with addiction, like, it's never too late to learn new things, right? And you might do one thing that works really well for like 5 years, and then it kind of stops working. You get complacent, or you need something different. Like, our bodies and our minds change over time. So I think it's really cool to keep it, progressive and forward thinking, and just constantly, giving these different dimensions. Even that you have people talking about psychedelic treatment, even though it's not really something that you're like super into, but you're like, hey, for somebody that might be the thing. So let's put it all out there.
Yeah. If you're not changing, you're not growing, right? I did want to say one thing, because I thought it was funny and telling, right? So in recovery on Long Island is a very small community, even though it's very large. So I'm walking out in the parking lot, like around the circles, like, an idiot, right? Because I can't find where the building is. And I see these two guys outside of the aviation building, wherever it is. And I said, hey, by any chance, do you know where the radio station is? And the guy sees my hat, Sober Curator hat, and he goes, nice hat. I go, oh, thanks. He goes, what is that? I go, it's a sober lifestyle magazine. He goes, I have 2.5 years in recovery.
There you go.
And I was like, the one person I run into asking where the radio station is a person in recovery. And he's like, what are you doing at the radio station? I go, well, it's a recovery radio show. And he's like, really? I was like, you can't make this stuff up, right? Yeah. And that's just, again, by you talking about it and doing this radio show, like, maybe that guy listens now. Yeah. And then he tells like 5 or 6 friends in recovery. And then all of a sudden it's about breaking that stigma and identifying. And, I never once doxed myself online in my 13 years before I got in this business. I'm not one of those guys that puts, my anniversary on Facebook, or for no reason. It's just, it didn't feel right for me and my profession even. And since I've been in this profession, I scream it from the rooftops, because now it's right for me. Maybe not for everybody else, but it's right for me now. So
great, Jason. Can you one more time just give your website and then also contact information if somebody wants to find you? Could be contact form on the website, email, number, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, sure. So the website is sobernotsubtle.com. You can reach me at sobernotsubtle@gmail.com. I encourage anybody in recovery or has a loved one or family in recovery to submit a personal story. and you can hit me at that email. And also quick plug for the sobercurator.com. So Elise, gives me a pat on the back for that.
Yeah, no, great job. Appreciate that. If you have questions about Water Gap, check out our website, watergapwellness.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful week.